closed?
Yes.
So how are we supposed to file for unemployment?
Customers stunned today by the sudden closing of EDD, California's unemployment office. The unexpected closing caught nurse Linda Rice by surprise.
I came in here to pick up papers because if I go out on disability, I cannot do a password reset online. The online process has failed to send me a password reset email message.
Linda Rice will have to file any future claims online, and so will trucker Yugendra Singh, who drives to the port of Oakland, where his trips have been reduced from 5 a week down to 2.
The booking is slow because the ships are not coming from China. It's slowed, so booking is no more.
If you do it online, here's the center.
The closing comes just as Nordstrom announced today it is sending its employees home, along with Macy's for at least the next 2 weeks. So why the surprise shutdown today by EDD?
Because we want to protect, of course, everybody in the community, but in addition, our staff. And so for those purposes, we've closed down public counters in our offices.
EDD isn't the only government office shut down today. The Social Security Administration is also closed to the public.
I was shocked. I was like, wow, this is actually happening? I was like, wow, so we really got to take things serious now. This is scary.
Now serving G10.
The Department of Motor Vehicles is still open today, but DMV is practicing social distancing by limiting the number of people inside, creating some lines outside. But the agency also announced that customers can avoid coming to a DMV office for the next 60 days if they're concerned about the virus.
We're having EDD issues.
Yes.
Have they been resolved?
Not at all. Not in the slightest.
Eric is part of a confusing backlog of unprocessed claims from March and April.
They just said, oh, you have incorrect identification. Which part? I literally sent them everything I had. As far as a black and white copy of my ID, and a colored one too, just in case, and my W-2s. It's like, what else do you guys need? Literally over every phone call that I've had with them, just to check over to see everything's good, they literally told me that everything was good.
EDD says people like Eric are rare. The vast majority of claims processed within 3 weeks.
When talking specifically about claims that were filed in March and April, how many unprocessed claims are there?
That's a very, very small percentage, probably less than 1%. We're trying to make sure that we, again, throw everything we have at some of these older claims to figure out what might be holding them up that's more complicated than the typical claim.
And I understand it's a relatively small percentage, but there's still people that haven't received any income in about 3 or 4 months.
It is heartbreaking just how overnight this record surge of claims has come. And it hit us at a time with very record low unemployment, low funding, low staffing. Even if people are eligible for these back weeks, we will make sure you get paid for those weeks. If you're eligible, you will receive that payment.
As for Eric, his benefits are still on indefinite hold.
Not just my phone, right? I have to try and see if I can get my mom's phone or my grandmother's phone just to call them all at the same time, just to get in contact with somebody. So 3 phone lines on at the same time, and only one might answer.
The bills, and going through them, I see EDD.
And none of the letters were for her or her husband, Johnny.
It's a huge mistake. And realizing that there was at least 12 different names on these envelopes, all with our address.
So I said, let's think about how we get these back to these people. And my first thought was KCRA 3 investigates.
The Campagna showed us a stack of 30 letters made out to 12 different people. Most of the names appeared on multiple envelopes. All the letters came from various EDD offices across the state, including the Overpayment Center, and all were marked time sensitive.
Going through that process several months back with my husband being on disability, we know how important it is to get that information back in a timely manner so that you can receive your next check.
There's a lot of people out there who really need these documents or checks or whatever's in these envelopes, and to see this happen it's frustrating. We pay into this every day when we go to work so that when in times of need we can be taken care of.
And it's not just the Campagnas wondering what they have and how they got it. KCRA 3 Investigates was contacted by 3 other people who had the same mailbox experiences this week. One of them sent us this photo of all the letters she found. As soon as Campagna showed us the letters, we started trying to get a hold of EDD to get some answers. How did this happen? What are these letters? And why were they all sent to the same incorrect address? We asked EDD repeatedly for an on-camera interview for this story and didn't get one. They did send us a statement confirming a federal fraud investigation. It says, in part, the EDD Investigation Division, ID, is actively looking into the details of this and other troubling incidents. The ID is aware that people are receiving multiple pieces of EDD mail while asserting that they have not filed an EDD claim.
Well, the gallows humor is now we know where the checks are going. But this is just yet another example of what has been broken with our EDD system.
Bay Area Assemblyman David Chu says this is no laughing matter. He is pressing for answers and recently wrote a letter to the governor signed by more than 60 other lawmakers demanding changes at EDD.
Where is the accountability for EDD right now?
That's a question that we've been asking for many months because from our perspective, EDD has not been accountable to the public and policymakers. When you have literally over 1 million Californians in recent weeks who have not received the claims that they are owed and unable to get an answer to where their benefits are, this is a department that has not been accountable and has not been accountable for years.
My husband and I sat down and thought of every possibility how our address would have been chosen, and I truly don't know.
As for the Campagnas, they hope whatever is going on here isn't keeping anyone from getting their unemployment benefits.
Listen, we have all these tax dollars that we pay, housing taxes, grocery store taxes, wherever we go, we pay taxes. Why is this stuff not up to date? I think we keep filling politicians' pockets and not taking care of the stuff that takes care of the people.
EDD's statement to us today also mentioned that you can file a fraud report on their website if you've received one of these letters. The agency hasn't given us a specific number of how many of these letters are out there, so we have no idea right now how widespread this fraud is or how much money has been lost.
How EDD has been failing Californians in so many different ways.
109 pages trying to get at exactly why millions of Californians are experiencing extreme delays in getting benefits they filed for in the early weeks of the coronavirus pandemic and why others haven't received desperately needed unemployment checks at all.
EDD has unfortunately in the last 6 months become an example of what is worst about government.
Assemblymember David Chu not holding back about some of the report's key findings, including EDD's focus on trying to find fraud, which, in short, was not effective. In fact, KCRA3 has investigated several instances of stacks of fraudulent claims showing up in Sacramento mailboxes, the agency flagging an estimated 40% of claims over the past 6 months that needed to be routed for manual processing. All of this as fraudsters beat the system, getting in and getting claims fulfilled through the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, federal funds that EDD was tasked with allocating.
Unfortunately, the anti-fraud measures that EDD put in place are actually preventing everyday Californians from accessing the benefits that they're due while not doing anything to stop the sophisticated criminal enterprises that are defrauding the systems.
Also outlined in the strike team's report, overwhelmed and understaffed phone lines.
Well, we've been saying for months that the call center system is absolutely entirely broken.
EDD's original phone line was only open Monday to Friday until noon, with only 20 staff members answering calls when the strike team visited. On average, nearly 7 million calls swamped the EDD phone lines each week during July.
Our constituents are calling dozens, if not hundreds of times. They're not able to get through. When they do get through, very typically the EDD staffer has just been hired and doesn't know the answer to their questions.
Not even an additional phone line set up during the pandemic could help. In many cases, the report says phones are answered by employees not adequately trained to handle the sorts of calls they receive.
Looks like for a lot of Californians, there is no immediate relief in sight.
A light also shined on EDD's extraordinary backlog of claims.
The report documents the size of a backlog that is shockingly huge. It's at least 1.6 million and likely larger.
The strike team recommending EDD adopt a burn down plan to deal with that among a host of issues plaguing the agency.
Many of us are very concerned that this will be too little, too late for Californians who've been desperately waiting for benefits since the early part of the pandemic.
And that burn down plan involves shutting down all new claims for at least 2 weeks, meaning no one will be able to file claims with EDD until October 5th at the earliest.
The director of California's Employment Development Department, or EDD, is retiring. Sharon Hilliard has worked at EDD for 37 years.
In an email to staff today, she said, "I have been committed to seeing the EDD through the most challenging times in the department's history, but I believe I can now retire knowing that the EDD is on a great path to success." Hilliard has been in charge of the department during a time of unprecedented unemployment claims.
And of course, it's been an embattled agency. KCRA3 Investigates had uncovered massive backlogs and delays within the department, as well as nationwide fraud targeting EDD during the pandemic. Several legislators had called for her resignation in the wake of our investigations. Since September, Hilliard oversaw changes from a governor's strike team that pushed to do a better job of identifying those filing claims. In several hearings with the legislature, she said they were implementing many of those recommendations, but not all of them. And just today, Governor Newsom was asked about the issues people are having getting access to their unemployment benefits.
And while the governor did not mention the EDD director by name, he did recognize the issues that the department has had over the past few months.
We are very cognizant about the need not only to address the situational challenge, but also address the medium and long-term challenges to once and for all fix the EDD system. And so that, I can assure you, is underway.
And Assemblymember Jim Patterson has been highly critical of the leadership at EDD. He says that this is an opportunity for the department to bring in someone to turn around that troubled agency.
We absolutely have to have a director that understands how to re-engineer and reimagine this department so that we do not have such a high vulnerability for fraudulent transactions.
It's the second audit this week of EDD, and this one points to even more severe problems inside the department. In fact, the audit found EDD has no dedicated fraud division.
It's just a quagmire of different units within EDD that are supposed to coordinate with one another. One unit has the ability to identify a potential problem, but they don't have the ability to stop the payment.
KCRA3 Investigates first reported the stacks of envelopes, fraudulent accounts hitting California mailboxes last summer. Yet Howell says that even as those reports continued, EDD continued to make payments into December of last year. This because a fraud prevention safeguard had been removed by EDD management to speed up processing.
That was a decision that was made that the administration, executive management didn't really understand how their IT system worked.
In a news media call on Monday, Labor Secretary Julie Su put blame for much of the fraud on the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program and claimed a lack of guidance by the federal government. But Howell says the Department of Labor warned unemployment departments about fraud prevention twice, and not all the fraud was under the PUA.
EDD certainly got warnings very early on in 2020 about the potential for fraud.
Even when the EDD did begin to act, freezing hundreds of thousands of debit cards, there was no plan to assist people with legitimate accounts. When asked about the account freezes by the state legislature, then Director Sharon Hilliard told an oversight committee it was Bank of America, which handles the debit cards for EDD, that froze the accounts. According to the audit, that was a lie, one that is angering legislators like Bay Area Assemblyman David Chu.
We now know that when EDD directed Bank of America to freeze accounts, which they claimed was Bank of America's decision, they didn't have a plan to unfreeze the accounts of legitimate, honest Californians that were desperately awaiting checks. Incredibly, incredibly, incredibly upsetting.
EDD has already verified they paid out $11 billion in fraud, a number their own records show is likely to climb as high as $30 billion. In Sacramento, Brittany Johnson, KCRA3 News.
Howell's audit says the EDD needs to establish a central fraud
estimate of the fraud that was perpetrated throughout the pandemic.
Of the $177 billion that was paid out,
$20 billion is estimated to be fraudulent.
What started as $11 billion paid out by California's Employment Development Department to fraudsters has now nearly doubled. This new estimate coming as members of the Senate and the Assembly met to see how many changes had been made inside the department. Assemblymember Tom Lackey began the hearing with a visual aid showing 26 dump trucks filled with cash. EDD put the blame mostly on criminal gangs. Lackey was not convinced.
I've spoken to a number of state directors across the country. There's not one state that did not experience a substantial amount of fraudulent claimants.
As it was somewhat explained away, is all states have the problem, and that we have a strong gang member element in this fraud, which we may have some, but it's way beyond that.
Legislators also asked about another looming problem, the state's unemployment trust fund. With so many people unemployed, the trust fund now has a nearly $20 billion deficit, meaning the state took that amount in loans from the federal government. Loans that businesses, not the state, will have to pay back.
Most employers will start to see that higher increased federal tax coming January of 2023.
Still, EDD has implemented roughly 60% of the auditor's recommendations, including phasing in new computer systems over time, new employees in the call centers, and new laws that put those changes in statute, meaning EDD has to follow them by law.
Wave of EDD fraud. According to EDD, there has been a recent rise in the filing of false disability insurance claims.
Yeah, our investigative team has spent the past year documenting widespread fraud that involves EDD unemployment benefits, and we continue our investigation tonight as Sacramento County DA Anne Marie Schubert joins us live right now to talk about these new reports of EDD fraud. And District Attorney Schubert, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So just when you think that the EDD couldn't leak any more money, here we go with another scam that some perpetrators are using. Tell us a little bit about this.
Well, it actually came to my attention because some folks that I know had actually received some letters, and it was more than one person, and it appeared that some of these thieves were trying to target businesses as well as private individuals. So I reached out to EDD, and in fact, they have seen a recent significant increase in these types of scams. I will say this, first of all, this is identity theft. So people are stealing people's identity and then trying to register. So there's been no breach of EDD. What it is people stealing identities, then going on trying to create accounts. It's another mechanism that thieves are trying to do an end run around the system to, rip off taxpayers, basically.
Mm-hmm. And how big of a problem would you say this is?
Well, I think EDD has, they sent out their own press release last week, and I give them credit for doing that. They're trying to keep people vigilant. That's the most important thing, because at the end of the day, people can steal identities, and that's what happens. You can get a breach at a business, you can get breach from individuals. This seems to be disability insurance. So while they've done a good job now of cutting off the pandemic unemployment fraud, now folks are moving on to different things that they think they can somehow get into the system. So it's important people understand if they get letters that they did not apply for, that they go online and to the Ask EDD and they report the fraud so it can be stopped.
Got it. So we have this new way basically of people who are stealing identity. So in light of all of this fraud that's going on, what are some of the safeguards? Do you know about any safeguards that are being implemented by EDD to help stop this?
Yes, if you look at what they're doing, they're setting up new additional verification systems so that what they've seen is a recent increase in these disability insurance claims. And so with that increase, they're adding new tools to make sure there's some kind of secondary verification so that they know that some folks are trying to penetrate the system. So that may slow some of the legitimate things down, but it's really a preventive measure that they're taking. Again, you can't fault them for identity theft. What they're trying to do is stop people that are stealing identities from going on and taking these new types of claims.
And you touched on this a little bit, but maybe in some more detail, what should people do if they get one of those EDD letters and suspect fraud?
I would go online. You can go on to askedd.ca, I think it's .gov, but Ask EDD, and you can actually report it online. And that's probably the most efficient way that they can do it, is to go directly through the website, because then they get alerted right away, as opposed to if there's any kind of backlog with the phone systems.